So imagine, you break your arm, right?
Oh, totally. Ouch.
Yeah, exactly. You go to the hospital, the doctor takes an x-ray, and boom, there it is on the light board.
Just a jagged, undeniable white line right across the bone.
Right. And the doctor points to it and says, there's the problem. It's entirely binary.
It's either broken or it's not.
Exactly. It's a clean, comforting reality because, well, we crave that kind of visibility.
We really do. We like things to be easily categorized.
Easily diagnosed, instantly understood. But what happens when you try to take an x-ray of an entire economy?
Yeah, that's where the machine breaks down.
Right, because the patient isn't a single person anymore. It's this, complex, breathing ecosystem of millions of human beings.
Millions of people making billions of daily decisions.
Exactly. Suddenly, your x-ray machine is just completely useless.
You're just staring at this incredibly murky diagnostic landscape.
Filled with overlapping variables and, hidden motivations and delayed reactions.
Which is exactly what we're looking at today. Welcome to a special EmpowerMigra deep dive.
Today, our x-ray machine is pointing right at the ultimate dinner table debate.
The big one.
Yeah. Our core mission here is to take these dense, rigorous scientific studies on migration, the labor market, and discrimination.
And just, break them down into something you can actually use.
Right, completely stripping away the academic jargon that usually keeps this stuff locked up in university libraries.
So the goal today is to look directly at those simplified narratives.
The prejudices, the gut-feeling economics about migration.
The stuff that just seems to float in the air we breathe.
Mm-hmm.
We are putting all those assumptions under a highly calibrated scientific microscope.
To see what the peer-reviewed research actually reveals.
Because when you strip away the emotion and just look at the raw data of human movement,
the results usually run completely counter to what conventional wisdom tells us.
they really do.
So if you take a step back and think about the holidays rolling around or maybe a summer barbecue.
Oh yeah, the classic family gathering.
Right. You inevitably end up sitting around a table where politics and the economy come up.
Always.
And in those moments, how often do you hear these simple, definitive statements about incredibly complex macroeconomic issues?
Oh, all the time. Someone always leans back in their chair and says, well, it's just basic supply and demand.
Yes. It's an argument that feels practically indestructible in casual conversation.
It's the ultimate trump card.
So the central question we are exploring with you today sits right at the heart of that.
Do migrants take jobs away from locals, or do they push down wages?
Right, because that is the foundation of so much public anxiety.
It is. And if you look at polling and public perception, a vast majority of the population firmly believes that this downward pressure on wages is an absolute, undeniable fact.
I mean, it feels like basic arithmetic to most people, right?
Exactly. You have a town with a certain amount of wealth, you add more workers to that town.
And therefore, the financial value of each individual worker just has to go down.
That's the assumption.
But hold on, my intuition is screaming at me here. And I think it's important to represent, the layman's perspective.
Go for it. Let's hear the factory floor logic.
Okay, so if there are 10 people waiting outside a factory for a single job opening, the boss holds all the cards.
Sure.
That boss can offer a minimum wage, and someone is going to take it out of pure desperation.
Because the competition is so high.
Right. But if there's only one person waiting outside that factory, the boss has to offer a premium to secure their labor.
Because labor is scarce.
Exactly. That's the basic, everyday reality of competition. So how does any economic study reconcile with that highly visible, logical sequence?
It's a great question.
Why wouldn't that exact dynamic just scale up to a national level?
Well, the scenario you just described is the traditional widespread narrative.
Right.
And it forms the basis of what economists sometimes call the length of labor fallacy.
The lump of labor.
Yeah. It makes perfect logical sense if you view the economy through a very narrow, highly restricted lens. The assumption is that migration lowers wages because it creates a sudden spike in competition in the labor market.
Just like the 10 guys outside the factory.
Exactly. It relies entirely on a very rigid, introductory level understanding of supply and demand curves.
The idea that if the supply of a resource goes up, the price of that resource automatically goes down.
That is the assumption, yeah. But the fatal flaw in that line of thinking is that it treats the labor market like a static, unchanging pie.
A static pie, meaning it never gets any bigger.
Right. It assumes there are a fixed, finite number of jobs in a town, a fixed amount of money circulating through the local cash registers.
And that adding more people simply means everyone at the table is forced to accept a smaller slice of that exact same pie.
Precisely. It treats the local economy as a closed system that cannot expand.
Which is probably not how real life works.
No, we have to fundamentally question that. Is the labor market really a static entity?
Okay, let's ground this in a physical example for the listener.
Let's do it.
Let's say you live in a town that has exactly 5 carpenters, and they build all the chairs for the town.
Okay, 5 carpenters. Got it.
If 10 new carpenters suddenly move to town from across the border, the market for chair building is completely flooded.
Right. There's 3 times as much competition overnight.
Exactly. The price of a locally built chair and the wages those carpenters can command is going to drop because the supply of labor skyrocketed.
If we follow the static pie logic, yes.
And here's the catch. Human beings aren't just builders, they're sitters.
They are sitters.
Right. Those 10 new carpenters also need chairs for their own dining tables.
Is you.
So they are adding to the supply of labor, absolutely, but they're simultaneously adding to the demand for the product.
And that dual role is the critical mechanism that the dinner table argument completely ignores.
It just totally leaves out the consumption part.
Completely. When individuals arrive in a new town, they don't just arrive as, isolated units of labor waiting to be purchased.
They arrive as active consumers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we can't just rely on a theoretical analogy about carpenters and chairs to settle a national debate.
No, we need actual proof.
Right. To find out what actually happens when thousands of people move, we need hard, empirical data.
We need to trace the actual wages in real regions.
Yes, regions that have experienced varied levels of migration over a long, sustained period.
But mapping out where people buy chairs versus where they build them across an entire country, that's a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult.
You can't just look at a map of a country and guess the economic weather.
Which brings us directly to the focal study of this deep dive.
Yes. To find the truth, we are looking at a 2016 study by researcher Tanja Fendel.
Published in the Journal of Economics and Statistics.
And it's titled Migration and Regional Wage Disparities in Germany.
Fendel took on a monumental task with this research.
What was she trying to figure out exactly?
She set out to answer this highly contested question with absolute mathematical rigor. Does migration actually have a measurable causal impact on regional wages within Germany?
Causal being the key word there.
Exactly. And she recognized that to get a real answer, she couldn't just look at the national average.
Because the national average just blends everything together.
Right. It just becomes gray noise. She had to look at this region by region.
Isolating different local economies to see how they uniquely reacted to the inflow and outflow of people.
Now, let's establish a really important boundary on the terminology here, because the word migration is highly loaded.
Yeah, it can mean a lot of different things to different people.
Very much so.
So when Fendel is measuring this, are we talking strictly about transnational immigrants, like people moving into Germany from abroad?
Wow.
Or are we talking about domestic movers, like a family packing up and moving from Berlin down to Munich?
The methodology here is incredibly comprehensive because she actually separates those streams to see the full picture.
Oh, nice.
She tracks what she calls the overall migration balance.
Which means everyone.
Right, the grand total of everyone moving into a region, including both foreign immigrants and domestic movers.
Okay, makes sense.
But then she runs the data all over again, isolating just the domestic migration balance.
So she wants to see exactly what happens to a local economy when only German citizens move around within their own borders.
Exactly, and how that compares to the broader mixture of global and local movement.
So she's looking at both the macro-global movement and the micro-domestic shuffling.
Yeah.
But gathering that kind of data over a long enough timeline to mean anything, how do you even begin to pull that off?
It's not easy.
You can't just stand at the border of a town with a clipboard.
No, definitely not. Fendel had to pull from massive independent data streams to piece this together.
And the scale of that data analysis is really what gives this study its weight, right?
So absolutely. She analyzed regional labor market data spanning over a full decade, from 1998 to 2009.
A huge window.
And she didn't just divide the data by the 16 German states.
Because state lines are often pretty arbitrary when it comes to actual economics.
Right. A state border doesn't stop people from commuting, So instead, she broke the country down into 96 German spatial planning regions.
Which are known as ORRs.
Yes, ORRs.
And these ORRs are basically functional economic zones, right?
Exactly. They capture the reality of how people actually live and work much better than a political border does.
Like an RR encompasses a central city and its surrounding commuting area.
Right. It's a self-contained local labor market.
So to map the economic realities inside those 96 zones over a 12-year period, she had to merge two incredibly robust data sets.
The first one is the EINCAR data set.
Which stands for Indicators and Maps on Urban Development.
Right. This is the official, high-level government data that tracks the macro indicators.
Like employment rates, overall population shifts, living standards, the broad strokes of the local economy.
Exactly. It gives you the shape of the region.
But the EINCAR data has a really big blind spot.
It does. It only gives you gross earnings.
Right. And if you want to know if wages are actually being depressed, gross earnings are deeply misleading.
Very misleading.
Because you need to know the actual average net hourly wages.
You need to know what people are actually taking home after taxes.
Factored against the exact number of hours they worked to get a true picture of their compensation.
And that brings in the second data set, which is the GSOEP.
The German Socioeconomic Panel.
Yes. This is a representative longitudinal study of private households.
And longitudinal just means they don't just ask different random people every year, right?
Exactly. They track the exact same households over time.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. They check in with these specific families year after year, asking really detailed questions about their income, their working hours, their life changes.
So by merging that macro in-car data with the micro, deeply personal GSOE data, Fendel could actually calculate the true net hourly wages across all 96 regions.
You could?
So we have 96 distinct economic ecosystems being tracked for 12 years.
We're watching the exact population flows in and out.
And we are tracking the precise net hourly wages.
But this is where any economist hits a massive brick wall.
The dreaded what caused what problem.
Yes. The issue of simultaneity. It is the single biggest hurdle in proving any economic theory regarding human movement.
Okay, let's look at this practically so you, the listener, can really visualize it.
Let's do it.
If you're looking at a spreadsheet and you see that a specific region, let's say a booming tech hub, has a very high rate of migration coming in.
Okay, lots of people moving in.
And it also has very high wages.
Right.
You have two data points, but you don't actually know the direction of the relationship.
You don't know the arrow of causation.
Exactly. Did the thousands of new migrants coming into the city cause the wages to increase through their economic activity?
Or did the fact that the wages were already high act like a giant magnet, pulling those migrants in from other regions?
Right. Which caused which?
If you simply look at a basic correlation, your results will be fundamentally flawed by what economists call endogeneity.
Endogeneity, meaning the variables are influencing each other at the exact same time.
Exactly. You cannot just take a snapshot of a rich town full of newcomers and declare that newcomers make a town rich.
Because you might just be taking a picture of people stepping off a train into a town that was already wealthy.
Precisely. You haven't proven anything about their impact.
So how did she fix that?
To bypass this, Fendel utilized a highly advanced statistical model called Dynamic GMM Panel Estimations.
Dynamic GM panel estimations. Wow.
It's a mouthful. GMM stands for Generalized Method of Moments.
Okay, we definitely don't need to write out the mathematical formulas here.
Oh, please, let's skip the math.
But we absolutely need to understand the mechanism of how this strips away the illusion, because it's really fascinating.
It is. The mechanism relies heavily on the concept of time lags.
Time lags. Okay, explain that.
Think of a time lag as looking at a photograph of a town's wealth a year or two before the new wave of migrants arrives.
Okay, so you lock in that baseline.
Right, and then you compare it to a photograph taken several years after they have settled.
Got it.
The GMM method basically uses past versions of variables to predict current changes. It mathematically isolates the magnet effect, the existing wealth that drew people in, and just subtracts it from the equation.
Oh, wow. So what you're left with is the pure, isolated change in the wage that occurred strictly as a result of the migration that happened.
Exactly. It isolates the arrow of causation.
But even with that arrow isolated, you still have the problem of comparing apples to oranges, don't you?
You do.
I mean, you can't just look at a rural farming region in the East and compare its wage elasticity to, like, downtown Frankfurt without making some serious adjustments to the baseline.
Yes, that is where the control variables come into play.
Right. Fendel's model had to neutralize all the other regional factors that could independently cause wages to shift.
So that the only thing left moving the needle was the migration itself.
So what does she control for?
Well, she controlled for the regional unemployment rate, which obviously heavily dictates wage bargaining power.
Sure, if unemployment is high, wages stay low.
She controlled for the average rent per square meter, which is a massive indicator of local cost of living and inflation.
Okay, what else?
She also controlled for demographic factors within the existing workforce. Like, she factored in the share of women in the workforce.
Why does that matter so much?
Because historically and persistently during this 1998 to 2009 period, gender wage gaps were very real.
Oh, right. So if a region suddenly had a massive influx of female workers entering the labor market, average wages might numerically appear to drop purely due to systemic gender pay disparities.
Exactly. It wouldn't be because of migration, it would be because of the wage gap.
That's incredibly thorough.
The model also controlled for the share of self-employed individuals because their income structures are highly volatile and don't reflect standard hourly wage negotiations.
Right.
And crucially, she controlled for the share of highly qualified employees.
Because if a region has a disproportionate number of engineers and doctors, the average wage is going to be heavily skewed upward.
Precisely. By mathematically neutralizing all of these factors, rent, unemployment, gender ratios, education levels, she effectively leveled the playing field across all 96 regions.
She basically created a clean laboratory environment within the very messy reality of the German economy.
She really did.
And we really need to understand how messy and fractured that German economy was during this specific time frame.
Oh, it was a turbulent era.
We're looking at 1998 to 2009. This is the era following the initial shock of reunification, leading right into the Hartz labor market reforms.
Germany was often called the sick man of Europe during the early part of this window.
And Fendel's data paints a picture of wild, almost unbelievable regional disparities.
The scars of the Berlin Wall were still deeply visible in the economic data.
Yeah.
Fendel highlights that average hourly net wages were sitting around a mere €7 in parts of Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania in the east.
€7 an hour.
Yeah. But if you travel to the prosperous regions of Baden-Württemberg in the west, average wages were €15 or more.
That is staggering. The geographic wealth divide was just massive.
It was.
You have people doing similar labor for less than half the pay, simply based on which side of a former border they lived on.
And the unemployment gap was just as stark.
Right. You had regions in Bavaria where unemployment was sitting comfortably under 5%.
Meanwhile, in parts of Saxony and Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, unemployment was raging at over 20%.
1 in 5 people out of work.
It was a highly polarized landscape.
And that polarization is exactly what makes this data set so valuable, isn't it?
Absolutely. If migration truly serves as a massive downward pressure on wages, or conversely, if it acts as a perfect equalizing force.
An economy with 20% unemployment in one region and massive wealth in another is the exact environment where you would see those forces react violently.
Yes, it's the perfect stress test for these theories.
Okay, so we have the fractured landscape. We have 12 years of microscopic tracking across 96 regions.
We have the dynamic GMM math, stripping away the chicken and egg problem.
And we've controlled for rent, education, and demographics. The scientific microscope is perfectly focused.
It is.
So, what did the actual numbers reveal?
The moment of truth.
Yeah. When we look at the core dinner table argument that migrants depress wages, does the data actually support the factory floor intuition?
The results of this study fundamentally dismantle the simplistic narrative.
Just completely take it apart.
When all the statistical noise is cleared away, the data shows that migration has an extraordinarily small, almost microscopic impact on regional wages.
So there's no massive wage crash.
None at all. There was no systemic depression of local earning power.
And the real shocker is the direction of that tiny impact.
Oh.
Because when looking at the overall migration balance, meaning the combined total of people moving into a region from abroad and people moving in from other parts of Germany.
The effect wasn't just small. It was technically positive.
Wait, positive?
Yes. The precise finding was that a 10 percentage point increase in the overall migration balance leads to a 0.0107% increase in relative wages in the long run.
Let's really emphasize the scale of that number. A 0.0107% increase.
It's tiny.
If you're earning €10 an hour, a 10 percentage point surge in migration to your city bumps your pay by roughly 1/10 of a single cent.
Yeah. For all practical day-to-day human experiences, Zero.
It's a complete non-factor in your personal wealth.
But mathematically, structurally, it is a positive bump.
It is the exact empirical opposite of the apocalyptic wage collapse scenario that is constantly broadcast in political debates.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this brings us back directly to the carpenter in the chair analogy.
Right. Why does this happen? Why doesn't the massive influx of labor push the price of labor down?
Because when we add people to a region, we are shifting the labor supply curve, yes. But we are simultaneously, and with almost equal force, shifting the labor demand curve.
They need to buy the chairs.
They need to rent apartments, they need groceries, haircuts, internet installations, and bus passes.
That increased consumption represents an immediate injection of capital into the local economy.
It spurs local businesses. The grocery store needs to hire another cashier to handle the increased foot traffic.
The construction companies need more hands to build housing.
The barbershop can raise its prices slightly because it's fully booked.
And this is what economists call economic dynamism.
Exactly. The friction of new people existing and consuming in a space generates enough new economic activity to absorb their own labor supply.
Entirely neutralizing the downward pressure they supposedly create.
It balances out beautifully.
But remember how Fendel brilliantly split the data into overall migration and just domestic migration?
Yes, the two separate streams.
This is where the mechanics of that dynamism get incredibly interesting. What happens when you look exclusively at German citizens moving around within Germany, stripping out the foreign immigrants entirely?
When you isolate domestic migration, the effect on regional wages actually flips and turns negative.
Well, it goes negative.
But again, the scale's incredibly tiny. A 10 percentage point increase in strictly domestic migration leads to a 0.001% decrease in the relative wage level.
Wait, so the overall mixture of everyone moving gives a tiny positive bump.
Right.
But if you only look at locals moving towns, it gives an even tinier negative bump. What is the underlying implication there?
It implies that the slight positive economic dynamism, that protective layer of new demand and productivity that keeps the regional wage from dipping, is primarily being driven by the inclusion of transnational migration.
Foreign migrants are the ones adding a specific critical layer of new consumption.
Yes. Entrepreneurial energy or specific labor gap filling that elevates the overall effect into the positive.
Wow. So when you remove them from the equation, the purely internal shifting of the existing population creates a fractional drag.
Exactly. Fendel also looked at another type of movement to test this consumption theory, which is commuting.
Right, commuters, people who live in one region, say a cheaper rural RRR, but drive every day to work in a high-wage city RRR.
What did the data show about their impact on the city's wages?
Zero effect.
Statistically, commuting had absolutely no impact on the regional wages of the destination city.
And this perfectly reinforces the theory of economic dynamism, doesn't it?
It does. A commuter supplies their labor to the city, but at 5:00 p.m., they get in their car and take their paycheck back to their rural town.
They buy their groceries there, they pay their rent there.
They do not consume in the region where they work, which means they supply labor without supplying local demand.
And yet, even without providing that demand, they still don't crash the city's wages.
Exactly.
So if we have established through incredibly dense 12-year longitudinal data that the wage impact of moving is essentially a flat line,
Right.
this raises a massive psychological and economic question about the people actually doing the moving.
It really does, because moving is expensive.
It's exhausting. It is incredibly stressful.
If wages barely budge and you can't guarantee a massive leap in your earning power, why do people pack up their lives and migrate in the first place?
That question formed the second major equation in Fendel's study.
She reversed the lens to see if regional disparities, like the fact that Baden-Württemberg offered double the wages of Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, were acting as reliable magnets for domestic migrants.
Because in classical economic theory, human beings are modeled almost like rational, profit-maximizing robots, right?
Oh, completely. The neoclassical assumption is that if wages are low in the East and high in the West, people will automatically and efficiently flow from East to West.
Until the labor supply balances out and the wages equalize.
Yes, it's the idea of water finding its level.
The economy is just a series of connected pools, and human labor will just naturally slosh into the pool with the most money until everything is flat and equal.
That's the textbook theory. It's supposed to be this natural, automatic adjustment mechanism that cures regional inequality without any government intervention.
But Fendel's data revealed a massive fallacy in that theoretical model.
A huge fallacy. When looking at the domestic migration balance, the study found no statistically significant effect of regional wage levels on the decision to move.
Let me make sure I'm hearing this right. The prospect of a significantly higher average paycheck in another city did not actually drive population shifts.
It did not.
That feels almost as counterintuitive as the wage data itself.
It does, until you factor in the friction of actual human existence.
The friction of existence, I like that.
Fendel notes that while a highly specialized software engineer might relocate purely for a 30% pay bump, the average worker makes the decision to uproot their life based on a deeply complex web of non-wage factors.
Right, because you aren't just moving your labor. You're moving your kids, your spouse, your entire daily routine.
And crucially, you are moving your housing costs.
The rent.
Fendel's data showed that while high wages weren't a strong magnet, high rents were an incredibly strong deterrent.
Housing markets are basically the great neutralizer of wage disparities.
Exactly. If Munich offers you €4 more an hour, but the rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in Munich is triple what you pay in your current town,
The gross gain of that higher wage is entirely wiped out by the cost of living.
it's gone.
Not to mention the invisible economy of social networks.
Oh, that's huge.
If you live near your parents, that might equal thousands of euros a year in free childcare.
Right. And if you move across the country for a slightly better hourly rate, you suddenly have to pay for daycare.
You lose your local support system, you lose the mechanic you trust, the community you belong to. The human friction of moving is immense.
Which is exactly why the water finding its level theory fails in practice. People rely heavily on social capital.
You don't just abandon a rich social support system and uproot your family for an extra 50 cents an hour in net purchasing power.
You really don't.
So if people aren't automatically flowing toward high wages like robots, then that magical adjustment mechanism that neoclassical economists promise doesn't actually exist.
It does not exist.
Oh.
Because people do not perfectly and fluidly relocate to chase regional wage peaks, migration alone does not automatically equalize economic inequalities across the country.
So the disparities just persist.
They persist. A struggling town in the East is not going to suddenly catch up to a booming tech hub in the South simply through the natural shifting of the domestic population.
The structural differences, the infrastructure, the legacy industries, the local educational institutions, they're far too deeply entrenched to be solved by individuals merely packing moving boxes.
Exactly.
If you take a step back and look at the headlines you see on your phone every morning or the rhetoric you hear during an election cycle, there is a massive glaring disconnect.
A huge one.
If migration really dragged down wages the way political rhetoric loudly claims it does, why do rigorous, data-driven, mathematically isolated studies like Tanja Fendel's show practically zero negative effect?
It's the million-dollar question.
In fact, why does the inclusion of foreign migration show a tiny positive bump?
Well, observing this impartially, without leaning into any political ideology at all, we have to acknowledge that public debates rely heavily on simplified, emotional narratives.
Yeah.
The idea of an outsider taking a finite resource is a very primal fear.
Right, going back to the static pie.
But the data shows that the economy is not a finite resource.
Yeah.
The public fear remains incredibly high, while the empirical wage impact remains incredibly low.
So what is the invisible mechanism neutralizing that fear? If the supply of labor is increasing in a specific area, what is pushing back against the downward pressure, aside from the fact that these new arrivals buy groceries and rent apartments?
A major, well-documented factor in labor economics is the concept of self-selection.
Self-selection.
Yes, migrants, particularly transnational immigrants who cross borders, are not just a random, perfectly average sample of a home country's population.
Right.
They are, by definition, an exceptional subset.
Because the sheer act of uprooting your life, navigating complex legal systems, leaving your language and culture behind, and starting over it requires an immense amount of drive.
Drive, risk tolerance, and psychological resilience.
They aren't just passively drifting into a new labor market.
Precisely. Fendel cites the foundational work of economist Barry Chiswick.
Barry Chiswick.
Yeah, he established the theory of positive self-selection decades ago. Chiswick demonstrated that the migration benefit, the eventual economic payoff of moving, is significantly higher for individuals who are more capable, more adaptable, and highly motivated.
Therefore, those are the exact individuals most likely to make the journey.
Yes, they bring diverse skills, entrepreneurial energy, and a work ethic that can actively raise the overall productivity of a region.
And when local productivity goes up, businesses expand, and that systemic growth puts an upward pressure on wages that counteracts the simple increase in labor supply.
It's a compounding positive effect.
But I want to make sure we aren't painting over the reality of localized economies here. Let's look at the limits of macro data.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate.
Fendel is looking at 96 massive regions over a 12-year span. If I'm a local construction worker and a subcontractor suddenly brings in 50 new laborers to my specific town who are willing to work for less, I might genuinely feel a pinch in my bargaining power for a few months.
That's a very fair point.
My wages might stagnate.
Yeah.
Does this macro-level data obscure the micro-level pain that some individuals actually experience?
That is a crucial nuance, and Fendel acknowledges the limitations of viewing an economy from 30,000 feet.
Right.
Localized short-term effects can and do occur.
Okay.
If a very specific, highly localized industry, like a single meatpacking plant or a specific regional construction sector, experiences a sudden, concentrated influx of labor, there can be a temporary downward pressure on wages within that narrow sector.
Because the supply shock outpaces the immediate demand bump.
Exactly. But what Fendel's broad regional data absolutely proves is that the systemic economy-wide wage collapse narrative is a myth.
The system as a whole absorbs the localized shock, shifts the broader demand curve through consumption, and stabilizes almost entirely.
It self-corrects.
So if the economic reality of migration is this beautifully complex web of shifting demand, increased local consumption, positive self-selection, and the heavy friction of housing markets, why does the simple, mathematically flawed statement, migration lowers wages, hold on with such a death grip in our culture?
And that points to a deeper issue about how we consume information.
Oh boy. Don't get me started.
Simple narratives are cognitively easy to digest. Supply goes up, price goes down, takes 5 seconds to explain.
It fits perfectly on a bumper sticker.
It works flawlessly as a soundbite on a 20-second evening news segment. It demands nothing of the listener.
Whereas Fendel's dynamic GMM panel estimations, controlling for endogeneity and exploring the shifting equilibrium of labor demand curves.
That takes time.
Yeah.
It requires us to sit down, focus, hold multiple contradictory ideas in our heads at once, and actively challenge our own deep-seated assumptions.
Which is exactly why this kind of deep dive is necessary, because reality doesn't fit on a bumper sticker.
Reality is messy. It is incredibly nuanced. And understanding it requires us to look past our initial gut reaction logic, past the fear of scarcity, and look at the actual mechanics of human behavior.
As we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final highly provocative thought, drawn directly from the concluding observations of Fendel's study.
This is a really important takeaway.
She points out a looming demographic reality facing Germany and, honestly, many other Western nations. Forecasts strongly suggest that by the year 2030, Germany's available labor force is expected to shrink by almost 7% entirely due to demographic decline.
The population is rapidly aging out of the workforce.
And the birth rates have not kept pace with the retirement rates for decades. The structural foundation of the labor pool is literally hollowing out.
It's a massive issue.
So if we now know, based on a decade of rigorous data, that foreign migration is actually slightly boosting local wages,
Right.
if we know that it provides crucial economic stability through dynamic demand and consumption, if the local chair builders actually need new people to arrive just to keep buying the chairs,
Yes.
is the real economic danger for these regions not too much migration, but too little?
That's the question.
Because if those 96 regional economies do not attract new residents, who exactly is going to power their consumption, fill their tax bases, and sustain their local businesses in the next decade?
It is a profound structural question. And it completely flips the traditional dinner table argument on its head.
It really does.
The persistent, misplaced fear of wage depression might actually be blinding us to the very real impending threat of demographic and economic stagnation.
So the next time you are sitting at that dinner table and someone brings up the X-ray machine or the factory floor or the simple introductory supply and demand curve,
Just remember the data.
remember that the labor market is not made of numbers on a chalkboard. It is made of human beings. And human beings are wonderfully, beautifully complex. They consume, they build, they adapt, and they drive the economy forward in ways that simple math can never capture.
So true.
That was another deep dive from EmpowerMigra. Remember, understanding begins with listening.
Thank you for joining us on this extensive journey through the data. We encourage you to keep questioning those easy narratives, keep looking for the nuance in the headlines, and never be afraid to put your own certainties under the microscope.